From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast. This is episode 532. I am Andrew in our forum, Andrew NLSC on X. With me as always, my co-host Derek, DB3 in our forum, and DB3G and DB384 on X. Derek, good to be on here to talk basketball gaming and real basketball with you as always. To that point, how about your Celtics?
My Celtics? These aren't my Celtics, Andrew.
Ah.
So I haven't been watching the NBA playoffs really, or the NBA finals, and that surprised you, Andrew, because you know that I grew up a massive Boston Celtics fan. But to prove that it's not because I'm a Fairweather fan, as you know, Fairweather fans usually get turned off by losing, right? They go away from watching their team, or they stop supporting their team based on their team not being as good. Maybe they're not making the playoffs anymore. Maybe they consistently get bounced out early in the playoffs, etc. This Celtics team had a great regular season, right? Great record. They cruised their way to the finals. Obviously, the teams they were playing were injured, but at the same time, you can only play who's in front of you. But they're in the NBA finals, so naturally, as a mostly lifelong Celtics fan, you would think I'd be totally into this, right? But that's not the case. And why do you think that is?
Well, we both have our quibbles, shall we say, with the modern NBA.
Yes. So that is one of the reasons. The fact that the NBA is just not enjoyable for me to watch nowadays. I don't think the competition is what it used to be. The game is lacking variety. It very much resembles AAU basketball to me, and I absolutely can't stand AAU basketball. Even in the playoffs, and some of the footage that I've watched, it's still kind of a mess, in my opinion. And also, I just have no connection to this Boston Celtics team. I don't have a connection to the players, their personalities, their play styles. I'm just not into this Celtics team. So as you can imagine, if I'm not liking the NBA today, if I don't enjoy watching that product, and I don't have a connection to the players on the floor for the Celtics or the other side as well, the Mavericks and whatnot, why would I put myself through watching that? So I want people to know how obsessive I was as not only a NBA fan, but a Celtics fan growing up. I went years in the 90s and early mid 2000s with never missing a Celtics game. I made sure that I was right in front of the TV, always watching, whether it was the local broadcast or the national broadcast, whether the team won 15 games in 96, 97, or they won, close to 60 games in the late 2000s and whatnot. So it never, the record never mattered. I really enjoyed the players on all of those teams, on the struggling teams, on the successful teams. Absolutely loved the NBA during the 90s and 2000s, all the way up to the early 2010s and whatnot. Loved the style of play, loved the physicality, loved the variety, loved the different personalities across the league. I loved the way David Stern ran the league and whatnot. I think Adam Silver it's been a disaster under him, and I think you would agree. So yeah, I was talking with somebody at work about this because we were doing introductions. It was somebody that it was like a networking thing, and we were talking about our interests, and basketball got brought up. And what I told him is, I said, I haven't lost my love for basketball at all. I absolutely love the sport of basketball. Going to shoot around is still just as enjoyable now as it was when I was a kid. Playing in leagues is just as enjoyable now as it was when I was playing basketball in high school for the team and whatnot. So I still love the sport as much as I always did, but I hate what has happened to the sport at the youth level via AAU, the way it's even being played on the high school and college levels, and in turn what's happening with the NBA product.
And I absolutely agree. And to your point, nobody should be calling you a fair weather fan because, as you said, the fair weather fans, the bandwagoners, they're the ones that jump on when when the team is winning and jump off when the team is losing or the first sign of trouble or a player is traded, as the case may be these days. A lot of people following players more so than teams, especially the way players move around, obviously, which is something that you and I are not fans of. I mean, obviously, players should have the freedom to do as they wish, but that loyalty that used to be kind of a two-way street just isn't there, and that does damage the game, I think, knowing that where are the stars going to be this year? There was that consistency back in the day that made the NBA very special, and those matchups so special year to year. But yeah, you were on record saying that the 97 Celtics are one of your favorite teams. The Purvis Ellison, Dino Raja, D. Brown, of course, was still there. Who else was on that team? Was Sherman Douglas there at the time?
He was not. It was not. It was David Wesley and
That's
Rick
right, David
Fox,
Wesley.
and
Yes,
the one season of Brett Szabo and ML Carr was the coach, and it was the year of the tank. And
that's
later
right.
on, years later, ML Carr admitted to the tank. He admitted that there was games where David Wesley would be just going off and he'd be on fire, and he was just doing a little bit too good. So ML Carr admitted that he would take David Wesley out in order to lessen their chances of winning that game, because obviously what they were doing in that season was looking to get the worst record they could possibly get in order to have a chance at drafting Tim Duncan, and obviously that did not work out. But yeah, it's one of my favorite teams of all time. They were injured most of the season, but they fought tooth and nail every game, and they had so many close losses, probably due to tanking. But D. Brown and Dana Barros out there, and Dino Raja with his mid-range and back to the basket game. And we had Todd Day on that team trying to put up points for us. And it was such an interesting squad. Yeah, it's definitely, me not watching the Celtics today has absolutely nothing to do with their record, and it couldn't, because again, they had an amazing regular season, and they're in the NBA Finals.
So the funny thing is, I did actually watch Game 1. I was happy to see the Celtics win. I am kind of going for the Celtics, ironically, in this finals, you being the Celtics fan and me being the Bulls fan, and I'm here cheering on the Celtics. Apologies to Maz. I know she's a big Mavericks and Doncic fan, and hey, if we get a great competitive series, as a fairly neutral observer, I'm cool with that, but yeah, it is unfortunate that they could be going for that 18th ring, that 18th banner, and it's not really something you can enjoy. But that being said, I'm still kind of going for the Celtics myself. I don't think I've ever asked you this actually, but how did you feel about the Billups trade? Because the Celtics did end up drafting Billups in '97 when they missed out on Duncan, got the third pick instead, and then they traded Billups halfway through the season to the Raptors for Kenny Anderson, who'd been traded from the Blazers and didn't want to play in Toronto. How did you feel about that at the time? Were you looking forward to having Billups? Did you sort of see him as the future?
It didn't upset me. I never had a super attachment to Chauncey Billups. I didn't think he was the future for us either. I honestly didn't think he was going to end up being as good as he was, being an NBA champion, being the all-around point guard that he was, and the smart shot taker and the smart decision maker. Because when he was with the Celtics, one of the things that the commentators would harp on him about, and also something we used to discuss in our house that frustrated us with Billups, is he was kind of out of control. As a young player, he would often get into tough spots on drives where he would, drive into, two or three people and then not know what to do with the ball, right? Or one of the biggest things with him when he was younger was getting up in the air and not knowing what to do when he got up there, right? Do I kick it out? Do I go up for a shot? And as a result, he was not great at running our offense and getting other people involved. In fact, in Boston, oftentimes he kind of felt like he was a selfish player. So it definitely wasn't a shocker to me that he got traded. It wasn't something at the time that bothered me. But as I stated earlier, the Celtics tanked for Tim Duncan. Well, they obviously ended up falling to third in the draft that year, and they had the third and sixth picks, and their third pick was Chauncey Billups out of Colorado, and then their sixth pick, who I was more fond of, Ron Mercer out of Kentucky, and he was another player that I was attached to. I loved his jump shot. I loved his motor. I thought that he could always be better than what he actually produced on the floor in the NBA. He had a relatively short NBA career that actually ended at age 28, and I believe he did go through a few injuries and whatnot. He still averaged 17 points a game as a Celtic. But yeah, I think things could have been different with him if he had been under different coaching. Because famously, he was coached by, Rick Pitino when he came to the Celtics, who actually coached him in college. So you would have thought that it would have been a great fit. And Rick Pitino had a couple other guys on our team that he coached, Walter McCarty and Antoine Walker. But obviously, Rick Pitino was not the coach for Boston. He coached the Celtics to 36 and 46 in 97, 98, 19 and 31 in 98, 99 in that shortened season, 35 and 47 in 99, 2000, and 36 in 46 in 2000, 2001. And you and I kind of talked about it off air, Andrew. It is wild to think that he was actually coaching those Boston Celtics for 4 full seasons, because it felt like he was kind of in and out, right? It almost feels like he wasn't here long and was pushed out incredibly fast by the fans. And we weren't fond of him in our house either. But yeah, 4 full seasons coaching the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, it did feel a lot shorter than that, and I compared it to Tim Floyd with the Bulls, but that was actually that did actually feel very long. Those years with Tim Floyd and the Bulls, although that wasn't all on Tim Floyd. Ron Mercer, of course, became a Bull, a former Bull and Celtic, and also favourite of Fitzy in the forum. Shout out to Fitzy, wherever you are. But now that makes a lot of sense, because Billups, as you say, he wasn't Mr. Big Shot yet. He wasn't Big Shot Billups that he would become. He bounced around a bit in his early career, trying to find himself and find his place in the NBA, to the Nuggets, to the Raptors, obviously traded from the Celtics, to the Timberwolves, and then finally to the Pistons, where he did become that solid playmaker and defender and that player who could take on a super team in the Lakers in 2004, and then lead the Pistons to multiple Eastern Conference finals after that as well, and back to the finals in 2005 against the Spurs, obviously. So he did become that player, but yeah, people do forget that. They do forget that some of these players in their early years, it did take them a couple of years to really come into their own in the NBA.
Yeah, let's not forget that even guys like Karl Malone averaged 14 points a game in his rookie year, right?
John Stockton on the bench,
John Stockton came off the bench. Kobe averaged under 10 points per game his rookie year and didn't get a lot of minutes. In fact, he was on the bench for Eddie Jones and Rick Fox, right? Like that's insane to think about today, right? But he was still so young and still growing as a player, and the coach didn't have as much trust in him as Eddie
Bill
Jones
Harris,
and Rick Fox at the time, right? Exactly. So, and the funny thing about Rick Pitino is, and I often wonder, was he at home steaming about this? But in the 01-02 season, after he was gone from the team, the first season he was gone from the team, Jim O'Brien took over as head coach, and the team went 49 and 33 and went all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, and lost to the Nets in 6 games with not a roster overhaul, Andrew. So the fact that that happened right after Pitino left makes me think that we could have most likely done better in those 4 seasons he was the coach if we had had somebody else under the helm. And I also want to point out that we were incredibly fond of Jim O'Brien in our house. I think he was a hard-nosed coach. I think he coached the right way. If I had to compare Jim O'Brien to somebody as a coach, maybe Tom Thibodeau today, he would often get the best out of his players. He wouldn't allow players to make excuses. He ended up going to coach Philadelphia after Boston and had a winning record with them as well. In 04-05, they went 43 and 39 and made the playoffs. So yeah, I was a big fan of Jim O'Brien. I also want to point out with those Celtics teams, I wasn't often talking about the top names on the teams like Antoine Walker and Paul Pierce. I was super fond of the lesser known players, the role players, players that spotlighted as starters or even some end of the bench guys. Incredibly fond of guys like Andrew DeClercq, Tony Battie, Tony Delk in his short time with the Celtics. Big fan of Vitaly Potapenko. A lot of times it was those lesser known guys that I really fell in love with as a fan.
Also wild to think that Joe Johnson was a rookie briefly on the 2002 Celtics, was traded mid-season, and then had that game with them a couple of years ago as a replacement.
Yeah, one game.
And
he hit his one shot. The thing is, too, is Joe Johnson never really got a chance in Boston. He started 33 of the 48 games he played with the Celtics before being dealt to Phoenix, but he was only averaging 6.3 points per game and shooting 43.9% from the field. I think we may have given up on him too early. In fact, I know we gave up on him too early, and that is a shame, because obviously he went on to being an amazing scorer in the NBA, including one season where he averaged 25 points per game in 06, 07, and then had multiple 20-point-a-game seasons following. He's a multi-year all-star, etc. So, yeah, gave up on him a little too early.
Probably should have given up on Joe Forte and Kendrick Brown instead.
Yeah, probably should have drafted Tony Parker instead of Joe Forte.
Well, that too.
Because we could have, and that definitely would have helped the franchise quite a bit. But I'm sure Tony Parker is happy that he got drafted into that situation.
Yeah, that 2001 draft, Kwame Brown, the top pick, obviously. And you know what? Kwame had a pretty solid career, for as much as people wrote him off. He was in the league for over 10 years. He did have a couple of decent seasons, but obviously not the number one pick. Pau Gasol would probably be the top pick, I guess, and followed by Tony Parker these days. But always roll the dice, and these things in hindsight, and picking high school players was in vogue at the time. Obviously, the Bulls ended up with two of them, trading Elton Brand to the Clippers for Tyson Chandler, who they drafted for the Bulls, essentially. So, yeah, you look back, and it was all about getting the youngest player possible. Potential was the buzzword of the day. But, yeah, getting back to the 2024 NBA Finals, I'm sure I will continue to watch, at least casually, through the to the end of the Finals. It is the culmination of the season. Obviously, it is not just, as I saw a comment on Twitter, X, the other day, a silly tournament. The playoffs matter as more so than the regular season. This is where champions are crowned, obviously. And I've always got that interest there, being a big basketball fan as you are. But I totally get why you're not that into it and not as into this team as previous years. But once again, you are no fair weather fan, no casual, because look at the names that you're bringing up all these years later.
Yeah. I also want to point out, you brought up Kwame Brown. Another player that fans like to rip on is Darko Milicic, and he also had a very lengthy NBA career. He was in the NBA from age 18 all the way up to age 27, and he made, according to Basketball Reference, roughly $52 million in his NBA career. It was said not bad. And it's also not his fault that he got drafted first round, second pick.
Larry Brown.
Right. He didn't. Right. Exactly. He didn't choose his draft position. Obviously, he went way too high. Obviously, they were wrong overall about his potential. And there were some signs early on that it wasn't going to work anyway, because he showed signs of not loving basketball. Right. And he even came out and admitted that later, I believe, after he retired. So if you don't love the game, what are the chances that you're going to be a great player?
Ben Simmons.
So exactly. Ben Simmons, who knows? He could be completely out of the league soon. Right. Just for not wanting to play anymore because he doesn't because he doesn't seem to love basketball.
Yeah.
So but yeah, Celtics, if they win the championship, if they don't, whatever. That's how I look at it, which is, sounds wild for me to say, but I'm just not invested in this NBA Finals.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, NBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at NBA-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community. So, Andrew, the main topic today.
I asked the community, what is the first basketball video game you ever played, and why did you like it? And the bonus question there was, what was your go-to team and or player in that game? So Andrew, there is no go-to player, because my first basketball video game ever was Double Dribble. And every player looked exactly the same on the floor. They were all bald. They all had no eyes. They were all the same height. And there was no advantage or disadvantage to any of the teams that you could use. They all had the exact same skill levels. So you could ask me what my go-to team was, but every single time you played against the computer in that game on the NES version, by the way, folks, this game came out in 1986 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and it was developed by Konami. But yeah, anytime you played against the computer, 100% of the time, they were Boston. And I was a Celtics fan. You could use Boston versus another team if you played against another human, which is what we did most of the time in our house. But these are the only teams you could choose from in Double Dribble, Andrew. It was Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Los Angeles was wearing blue jerseys in this game, Andrew.
Forum blue.
And New York. Yeah. So you can only choose from 4 teams. Quarters could be played with 5, 10, 20, or 30-minute lengths, Andrew. And winning a game would show a basketball player in the team colors. So it would be green for Boston or blue for Los Angeles, Andrew, triumphantly holding up a trophy. The trophy's color was dependent on number of opponents defeated. 1 bronze, 2 silver, and all 3 gold. So yeah, super primitive game, right? And super limited as far as variety. Like, all the players played the same, all the players looked the same. But the second question here was, why did you like it? And what I liked about it was the pace. It felt like real NBA action at the time. It was fast paced. How the 80s were with basketball. It was,
of course,
pass the ball up the court as fast as possible and try to attack the rim so you can get that sweet cut animation, that dunk cut animation. Obviously the 3-pointer wasn't as big in the NBA at the time, but the cheating corner 3 and threes were incredibly accessible in that game. So it was trying to get to the 3-point line and shoot like a running 3 where you're jumping towards the hoop. And I also liked the fact that it felt like real competition. There was real strategy that had to be used in that game in order to beat an opponent. Steals were incredibly easy to get by just hitting a button while you ran through somebody's body. So you had to pass strategically. You had to move around the court strategically. You had to decide whether you wanted to take the chance and shoot more threes, or you were going to just try to jump through the lane to get that dunk animation and throw it down more often. I just think that those are the things that I liked about it. I thought the gameplay was really solid. And you and I even had a game on this where you were using Chicago and I was using Boston. And we played this a couple of years ago. But that game felt like really cool, good competition, right? And it was because of the pace. It's because of the steal mechanics. It's because of the ability to hit threes, but you can't lean on it too much, et cetera. So, yeah, that with Double Dribble, it led me to other 5-on-5 titles. So after Double Dribble, it was Jordan versus Bird. That was the second basketball video game I ever played. And obviously that had the one-on-one mode, slam dunk contest, and 3-point contest. But the next 5-on-5 title that I played was Bulls versus Blazers, made by Electronic Arts. And then following that, it was Tecmo Super NBA Basketball. Then it was NBA Showdown. Then it was NBA Jam. And then it was all these games in the mid-90s. It was, NBA Live 95, NBA Live 96, the NBA in the Zone series, and then the college games like NCAA basketball, et cetera. But Yeah, those are the things. That was my first game ever, Double Dribble, and those are the things that I liked about it. And those are some of the games that I played after Double Dribble. So, what about you?
Well, first of all, how often did I get screwed over in that game trying to dunk, trying to get that wonderful rotoscope?
With Chicago.
I know,
with Chicago.
right?
Jordan was in Chicago at the time. Not only Jordan, but so was Woolridge. Orlando Woolridge was in Chicago at the time. So you had the net busters over there. But when you played me, the only thing you were busting was the ball on the rim because you just kept missing dunks over and over.
I've never seen that in that game until then. I've never seen that happen in Double Dribble so often, missing dunks like that. That was funny, though. That was, we'll give it that. It was funny. No, obviously, you're absolutely right. It is primitive by today's standards, but there is still that excitement to the game. You and I can still play that. We could probably still play that today, even. If you said to me, do you want to play that again? I'd be absolutely up for that, because there is excitement to that game and the pace, and, of course, the novelty of the corner three and everything, the exploit there, and the rotoscoped cutscenes on the dunk animations, obviously. I'm thinking back, and I've been trying to think what was the absolute first game, because there was the three of them all in quick succession as I was getting into basketball in the mid-90s there. And I have a feeling, actually, that it might have been NBA Jam Tournament Edition on PC. It's either that, Live 95 for Super Nintendo, or Live 96 PC. Kind of all at once, trying to getting into basketball, watching more basketball, collecting the cards, obviously, and then getting into basketball games as well. I was already a gamer at that point, but now getting into basketball games, video games as well. And one of those is the first, but I do think it might have been Tournament Edition. And obviously, the draw of NBA Jam Tournament Edition, it is, like the original NBA Jam, that fast-paced arcade action. It's exciting. It's an exciting, exaggerated version of basketball. It's got Tim Kitzrow on the call, obviously. And the PC version is a little bit buggy, actually. The Super Nintendo version is one of the better home ports. The PlayStation port is very similar to the PC version, actually has some of the same issues. Still a pretty good port of the arcade version, though. I just played the hell out of that game. My cousin Clinton and I playing through the tournament, unlocking the hidden players, defeating all 27 teams at the time, playing with all 27 teams as well, writing down whenever we got somersault dunks, writing down our stats, so many memories with that, and then getting into the seasons with Live 95 and Live 96 as well, playing through the 94 season as it was in the Super Nintendo version of Live 95, still set in the 94 season with final 1994 season rosters, playing a 26-game season with the Bulls, and I think playing an abbreviated 1-3-3-3 playoff format as well, because originally NBA Live 95 for Super Nintendo was a rental for me, and of course if you only have that game for a week, you need to get through it very quickly. No guarantee that your save will be there the next time you rent it from the video store, so I did finish that in a week. That was my first virtual championship, actually, apart from NBA Jam Tournament Edition, of course. So yeah, I think Tournament Edition was my first, thinking back to it, and of course I was using the Bulls, couldn't use Jordan because he wasn't in the game, so yeah, it was all about Pippen.
I have a couple things to say. First off, how exciting was that time for you? The whole, I love basketball now, and I want to get my hands on everything basketball.
Magical.
And you fell in love with NBA Jam Tournament Edition. You fell in love with the Chicago Bulls. You ended up collecting cards. How amazing was that first pack opening and that first box opening, and getting the card sleeves and getting the hard cases and looking at the back of the card and reading the stats and reading the bios and looking even at something like the player's height and weight in college and learning all of that, and then maybe even getting a basketball almanac and then looking for basketball magazines. What a time.
What a time, yeah.
Like, just thinking about it right now is actually like making the hair stand up on my arms, because I, like, even in my living room right now, I have countless books of basketball cards. I still have cards, and every single time I look at them, just the nostalgia is unbelievable. But yeah, I want you to expand on that in a second, because I love hearing about it, like your early days of collecting all this stuff. But I want to point out that Double Dribble for me was also a big hit, because basketball, specifically the Celtics, were always on at my house at that time. right? So I was already loving basketball, even as a really small child, even before I even put my hands on a controller to play double dribble. But the same thing happened with me. My dad was really into basketball. So we were getting all the games and we were getting the basketball cards and we had the basketball almanac. And I would be getting the magazines and I would be creating my own fake articles about the video games and things that happened. And I'd be using scissors to cut out, a player from the magazine like Isaiah Thomas, or specifically I did it with Isaiah Thomas. That's why I brought that up, because I was playing Tecmo Super NBA basketball and I wanted to, and I wrote up a fake article about a game that I just had. And when I say wrote it up, I used a typewriter, Andrew. And then I glued the picture of Isaiah Thomas onto the typed up fake article. And I just remember sitting there looking at it and just reading that article over and over and over again, pretending that it was real, right? We really used our imaginations back then. But yeah, my dad's love for the Celtics, my dad's love for everything basketball at the time also aided in my interest and really elevated my exposure to all the different avenues of collecting, etc. And that's still with me today. So some awesome stuff there. So let's hear about it. Let's hear about your early endeavors.
Yeah, I mean, basketball just really exploded in popularity in the mid-90s here in Australia. I mean, obviously it was very popular over there, and Michael Jordan's comeback spurred even more interest in the NBA when he came back in 1995, but it was kind of the catalyst for a lot of us really getting into basketball here as well. My peers, my classmates at the time, and my cousin was already into basketball. He was already playing basketball, and we were already close, but this was a new way for us to, a new thing for us to do when we were hanging out, play games and collect cards and trade them and everything. My first cards I actually got a couple of years before I really got into basketball. I had that casual interest there and had an awareness of basketball and probably played it at school at some point and had it wasn't an official Nerf hoop, but it was kind of one of those, unofficial knockoff Nerf hoops as well. So I had that, some passion for basketball, some interest in it before that. And my first packs were Christmas 1994, so slightly before I really got into basketball. And it was just the thing to do because everybody was kind of collecting cards and just getting that pack, those 94, 95 Upper Deck Collector's Choice cards. Still have them as well. There was always that talk of, we're going to sell them. This is going to pay for university, pay for college or whatever in the future. But here's the thing, Derek. When everybody's collecting them and they're not rare, they don't become rare, expensive collectibles. Go figure. But I always at the back of my mind, I thought, I don't really want to sell these. These are special. I like looking at them. Like you say, pulling them out, looking at the stats on the back of the cards and the player bios and the interesting information and the interesting trivia on the cards. For example, Kiki Vandeweghe, have a card of him, and he likes to collect ancient coins and rare automobiles. I know this for a fact because it's on a trading card, and a trading card wouldn't lie to me.
Yeah, just to let you know. So I found out that Dee Brown's favorite musician was Janet Jackson, based on the back of a basketball
card. There you go.
And that's something I've never forgotten. And that's something that I read on a basketball card decades ago. So
it sticks with you.
Wild stuff, right? It just sticks with you.
And getting the magazines, there's a book, the Superstars of the NBA 95, I believe it's called, just reading all the bios, getting to learn about the players at the time, the upcoming stars like Latrell Sprewell and more established stars like Hakeem Olajuwon and so forth. And just getting into basketball, getting the magazines, getting the cards, then getting into games as well and getting to play with all these players. And it's funny, I look at the cards I got, and my folks got me a fair few packs to open up. I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 packs at the time. And the amount of stars, obviously, just the galaxy of stars that were in the league at that time, Derek, as we've talked about before, but just the amount of great plays that you get in those cards, and you compare that to the card collecting modes in basketball video games these days, and it just shows you how the odds are very much not like trading cards at all. You don't get anywhere near the value in a My Team or Ultimate Team pack. I mean, that's by design, obviously, for reasons we've discussed before, but it's just funny to compare real packs to virtual packs. But yeah, just such a magical time, as I said, and learning about the game and learning all this new information, and then watching the games as well, because we did have a couple a week, or at least one a week here on free-to-air TV, and the anticipation and always wanting it to be a Bulls game, obviously. And one time they got me in 97, Derek, they faked me out. during the intro of the game of the week, they said, the Bulls are dominating, and who can stop the Bulls? And I'm like, yes, it's going to be a Bulls game. And then said, well, it might be one of these two teams, the Pacers or the Hawks. Oh, come on, you faked me out with the intro. So I was so pissed at the time that that they got me with that fake out. But always special to get a Bulls game. Recording it every week, recording NBA action. The late great Jim Fagan, obviously. And then when my cousin was here, playing the games, watching the games, the real games, going into the backyard and imitating what we'd seen and trying to recreate the top 10 of the week. Yeah, such a special time.
Yeah, we used to have the dual VCR thing where we could record and then make highlights out of it.
Wonderful.
And I remember doing that quite a bit, where we would try to record every game and of the Celtics, and then I would try to make highlight reels out of it. And that's funny because we still do that today with the NLSC, right, with our gameplay videos.
Sure.
So some things never die. Never let go of that stuff. I'll tell our audience that over and over again. Never let go of the stuff that made you feel good, right? Things that you loved to do. The funny thing with basketball cards is, so I think my first 2 sets that I ever had was, I want to say I had 89-90 NBA hoops. And then you will remember them. I had that NBA hoops booklet set. And it was the card books that were the same size as basketball cards, but they had a bunch of pages, a longer bio for the players. It had, more stats than the average card. The just beautiful basketball cards. And I had, the Michael Jordan booklet and the Clyde Drexler booklet. And I still have them, actually, in card binders here. But I don't know if you ever did this. We love basketball cards so much that we started trying to make our own. So we would draw our own basketball cards. We would try to draw the players. We would write their stats on the back. And then later, when we ended up getting computers and whatnot, we started doing that on the computer. And my brother, Nick, is a pro at it. He has made some unbelievably realistic looking basketball cards. And I've actually shared those on social media. And those posts actually blew up. And he made players like Michael Jordan and Russell Westbrook and David Robinson and Hakeem Olajuwon and Kevin Garnett, and just so much fun. And card collecting and card making is just it's a super fun hobby. But yeah, so back to basketball video games though, Andrew. So I told a story about me creating a fake article with Isaiah Thomas being cut out and glued onto the article. You had a story as well that you told on this podcast probably a couple hundred episodes ago about your fantasy Larry Bird situation. So before we get to the community's responses related to the community question, let's hear the Larry Bird story.
So my cousin would come down every holidays. We'd be playing an assortment of games, whatever was in my collection at the time. Didn't have the collection I have today, obviously. A couple more decades of collecting games gives you a much bigger collection, but I've gone back and collected games that I wasn't playing at the time, and that's something that you and I both enjoy, collecting and dipping into the collection these days. But one afternoon, we're down there at the local shops. Mum's down there getting some lunch, and we're getting basketball magazines and cards, obviously. And there in the newsagents, there is, for some reason, it must have just been in the back room, and they've just put it out there on the shelf just to get rid of, is a pristine copy of NBA Live 95 PC. Now, I've already got Live 95 on Super Nintendo, Live 96 on Super Nintendo, Live 96 on PC, a few other games as well, I think probably Live 97 at that time as well. And I didn't have Live 95 PC, but we had all these resources that our founders had made there in the download section of the NLSC, editors, roster updates, and so on. So I saw Live 95 PC, $20, had to pick it up. Pristine copy of Live 95 PC. We get home, we install it. It's funny to look back because, and I wrote an article about this way back Wednesday, when you play the sequel first and then go back and play the first game and you see the things that are retroactively familiar, but it would have been more familiar the other way around in the sequel, that it was kind of an updated version of the Live 96 PC was that updated version with the menus of Live 95, and yet it looks retroactively familiar because of the old, you see the old version second. But anyway, So we got Live 95 PC. We've started a season with the Houston Rockets. We're playing that every school holidays. Whenever he'd come down, we're playing different games and making progress in that season. 82 games, 12-minute quarters, of course, Derek. And we've got the editor, and we're feeling a little bit, I don't want to say bored, but you know how it goes with a season. You're keeping your interest going throughout the season, and it's we're blowing out the computer. We're looking for new ways to keep things fresh and interesting and fun, and do some weird stuff here and there. So we decide to bring Larry Bird out of retirement, and Zan Tabak, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. He's on the Rockets that year in Live 95 PC, so he's the candidate with the portrait, the white player with blonde hair to replace in the game. So we overwrite Tabak with Larry Bird. We bring him back. He's the starter for about, I want to say, 10 games or so. And then it just felt a little bit too silly. Like, why do we have Larry Bird making a comeback with the Rockets? And we did have him retire again. But at the same time, on my old site, the NBA Live domain, we're posting fake articles there. We're basically doing what we'd later do in the NLSC forum with story topics, with story threads, where we're posting updates about our season and stats and so forth. So we've got the articles there about Bird's comeback and Bird's retirement. I still have them in my archives. They're ones I don't want to share because they're a teenager trying to write like an adult, and I was always passionate about writing since I was very young, Derek. That probably won't surprise anybody, knowing how many articles I've written over the years, but certainly not my best efforts. Bit embarrassing to read again all those years later, me trying to do a professional article, and it's not bad, but it's very much a teenage effort, I will just say that. But had Larry Bird have that comeback, it was about 10 games, and that was that kept us entertained for about 10 games, having Larry Bird on the Rockets. But the funny thing we did, I put it together actually, was for the announcement article, not even a Photoshop, it's MS Paint, taking a black and white picture of Larry Bird and putting the Rockets logo behind him. Now, I could have made the Rockets logo black and white as well, but it just seems so much funnier to keep it in color with the picture, with the photo of Larry Bird from the 80s in black and white. So that is one that I have shared on my socials, in the forum as well, and also in articles. This altered picture of Larry Bird at a press conference with the Rockets logo behind him, and it's so ridiculous. And I share every so often. I'll send it to my cousin. I'll send it to Clinton on Facebook and Messenger just so we can laugh about it.
So then I have to ask, did Larry Bird in his return help the team improve? Were they winning, and what numbers was he putting up?
We were winning. He was our 3-point threat. We infamously started that season with Sam Cassell. Sam Cassell went 0 of 28 from 3 to start that season. So we really wanted...
Jesus.
Oh, yeah, right? So we wanted some 3-point shooting. So that was another reason why we brought back Larry Legend. Wasn't his best. I think about 18 points a game or so. And certainly, I mean, Hakeem was the star of that team, obviously, and Drexler was there. So kind of sharing the ball between them. And probably got a little bit too trigger happy from 3-point range with him, and that brought his percentages down and wasn't as effective as we liked. And I probably did adjust a little bit with his athletic ratings, probably adjusted a little bit for what his age would have been at the time, what, late 30s, I suppose. But yeah, that was another reason that it kind of felt a little bit disrespectful, I suppose, to have him there in the Rockets jersey. Yeah, it wasn't the best performance for Larry Legend, but at the same time, it was a fun 10-game stretch or so.
Well, he would have been pushing 40 in 95, 96.
Can you imagine pushing 40?
And pushing 40, right. Pushing 40, but with basically a broken back. Like that,
yeah.
You can't expect too much in the return of Larry Legend. What's funny is I read, we were talking about Bill Walton last week. He almost came back for the Knicks, I guess, in 1988 just to piss off Red Auerbach. Apparently that was what his words were. So I think that is kind of funny. Imagine having a video game team where you have Patrick Ewing as the starting center and you're able to bring in an aging bad foot Bill Walton, either to play alongside him at the 4 or, at the 5 and whatnot. That would have been super interesting. So yeah, fun going down memory lane there, but let's go down memory lane with the community with their responses.
So of course, when you put out this prompt, you actually put a short clip of Double Dribble, one of the rotoscoped dunks, of course. And that is, of course, a classic game from the infancy of basketball gaming, but Stildo 33 has that beat, actually, Derek. He says, Well, it was the Atari version that sucked. Lakers vs. Celtics was the first one that got me hooked on basketball. Mind you, I was playing this on a CGA monitor as well. Loved it. Eventually blew my mind away with BGA monitor. Tecmo NBA Basketball was another favorite because of the stats.
Yeah, Tecmo Super NBA Basketball and Tecmo NBA Basketball for NES, both of those titles had great stat tracking, which is very rare at that time in sports video games. And I've stated on other shows, the Super Nintendo version, so Tecmo Super NBA Basketball, also had digitized player portraits, and that added to the immersion. And at the time, obviously, we were super into basketball cards, and it kind of gave our video game a basketball card look when you went into the player profiles. So that was super cool. And Lakers versus Celtics, you and I both, we were able to pick it up, Andrew. You recently and me a few years ago, and we've connected on it and played, and I still think that game is pretty fun.
The PC version,
Lakers versus Celtics, the PC version. And I connected with at B-Ball Video Games on it, Stildo himself, another member of the community, and each game was fun. So I still think that game holds up today.
And we have both of the Live 01 legends weighing in here. First up, we have Nate Starshow, says Live 2001 for the PC. No surprise there. I played NHL 2000 PC the previous year, but I preferred basketball over hockey. Chris Webber and the Sacramento Kings were my favorite team because my dad said they passed like the Celtics. I also didn't like the Lakers or Shaq because it seemed too easy for them. As popular as the Lakers were in the early 2000s, I mean, the Lakers have been popular for decades, obviously, Derek. And I suppose every team that does dominate and is at the top of the league, they do get their haters, for lack of a better word, or certainly people start cheering against them. But as popular as the Lakers were in the early 2000s, I think a lot of people were hoping that somebody would knock them off. And certainly when the Kings came along, the 2002 Kings, that's a very controversial series, obviously. But even the 2001 Kings, with Jason Williams still on the team, very fun video game team as well. And yeah, Live 2001, it is not my favorite game. I do really appreciate it, though, at the same time, and will happily go back and play it. But there are some very fun teams in the 2001 season, from teams like the Kings, and of course you do have the Lakers. You've also got Patrick Ewing on the Supersonics. So some interesting teams throughout the league in Live 2001.
So my brothers and I call what he was talking about, using the Lakers championship squads in the early 2000s. We call that bandwagon jumping. We say, like, our rule is we can't use a championship team for a season. And so, like, my brother Nick loves using Michael Jordan, but he absolutely refuses to use Jordan in 90-91 through 92-93 or 95-96 through 97-98 in a season against us, or if we're playing on the same team. What Jordan does he use, Andrew? He uses the mid-'80s Jordan. So, for example, like the 85-86 Jordan, where it's Jordan and Woolridge and George Gervin and Juwan Oldham and Dave Corzine and Kyle Macy, etc. So, and Quentin Daly, by the way, who would put up points in a hurry on that team's bench. But I also love using Kobe in video games, but I refuse to use a championship Kobe in competition. So what I end up doing is if there's a mod in that game that brings forth the 05-06 Kobe, the Kobe that played with Smush Parker and Chris Mim and Kwame Brown and Lamar Odom and Jim Jackson, etc. I'll use that 05-06 Lakers team instead. And my brother Mark is actually the only one who breaks this rule. He is an insane Dirk Nowitzki fan. Dirk Nowitzki is, probably his favorite player of all time. He loves those early 2000s Mavericks teams, and those are the teams he uses the most. But he will use that 10-11 Dirk in video games against us. And but yeah, so we do not normally allow ourselves to use teams like Shaq and Kobe championship Lakers in seasons against each other.
I mean, it's more challenging, right? And it's you're going to have that balance, and you get to play with those underdog teams and those interesting teams that didn't succeed because other more powerful teams were ruling the roost. But they still got some great players there and some interesting lineups.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that there's a lot of teams that didn't win championships that were loaded with talent and, could have been champions.
Peaked at the wrong time,
I've talked about it before. Yeah, the mid 2000 Suns. Oops, they ended up having to go against the Spurs and those stacked in that stacked West in general.
Drexler's Blazers,
in those seasons. Yeah, Drexler's Blazers, exactly. Not only Drexler's Blazers, but the Kings team you talked about. They had a lot of good years there in the late '90s and early 2000s, whether it was with Jason Williams or whether it was with Mike Bibby. No bandwagon jumping there,
no.
Right? I mean, they were a great team, but they didn't win a title, and they're just fun to use in video games.
And Nate also mentions that he played Live 2001 strictly with the keyboard, while Roger Ward, of course, used the Wingman rumble pad. And that actually brings back memories of playing with my cousin as well, because we only had one controller. So whether we were playing Jam Tournament Edition or NBA Live at the time, whichever NBA Live it was that we felt like playing, one of us was on the keyboard and one of us was on a controller, on a gamepad.
Advantage Roger there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, I'm curious, and maybe they'll let us know on social media or if we have them back on the show, who was winning the most at that time. Because if you were coming through and getting some serious victories with the keyboard, that is pretty impressive.
And speaking of Roger, he says, NBA Inside Drive 2000 for PC was my first basketball video game. I would usually play with the Cavs. Then when we finally got Live 2001, I would usually play with the Knicks, because Sprewell and Houston were two of my favorite players. And those early 2000s Knicks, and of course Ewing on the Sonic set year, as I said, in Live 2001, still had some firepower, and Larry Johnson was still there, Marcus Camby as well. Sprewell and Houston, quite a duo in video games, if nothing else, and that big run in 1999, the 25th anniversary of that, the 25th anniversary of some of those big moments during the Knicks' Cinderella run in 99. I've seen them come up on social media, Derek, and the NBA nostalgia accounts that I follow on Instagram and X. So that's been fun to relive those memories of that weird but also exciting lockout season. But Inside Drive 2000 is a game that I actually got. I got Live 2000 first and really loved that, but I also got Inside Drive 2000 and just really didn't like it, and actually took it back to the store and traded it for GTA 2. I remember this very distinctly, Derek, and got the PC version of GTA 2. Still have that copy of GTA 2 actually in my collection, but did end up getting Inside Drive 2000 many years later, and I was kind of reminded why I didn't like it as much as Live 2000 when I played it again and reviewed it for Way Back Wednesday with the retrospective there. But it is a solid game, and it has a shot meter. It's one of the early games with a shot meter.
So first, the Knicks with Sprewell and Houston, some of the more fun video game teams, whether it's a current title or using mods and whatnot, is that Latrell Sprewell, Allen Houston, Larry Johnson, Patrick Ewing, Chris Childs, Charlie Ward, Knicks team. And the reason is because you have everything you need to attack your opponent. You got the slashing of young, primed Sprewell, who can also stretch the floor and hit shots. Allen Houston, just an absolute beautiful shooter. Like one of the most beautiful shots I've ever seen in my life. And obviously in those early games, he didn't have his own signature shot, but you pretended he did, right? You pretended you were really shooting with Allen Houston, but he could knock it down from anywhere. And then you had bruising LJ, who could stretch the floor at times for you, but also get you buckets underneath the rim. Like they had everything. You had two solid, tough guards. Charlie Ward, who I believe won the Heisman Trophy as a football player in college, but it was a super athletic, good NBA player. And then Chris Childs, who famously punched Kobe and was a tough player, and he could also stretch the floor. Love those Knicks teams. 98-99 Knicks, super fun team to put on the floor. About Inside Drive 2000, I've still never played it, but you know how fond I am of Inside Drive 2002. Yeah, we need to connect on that. But Inside Drive 2002, 2003, and 2004, I think all three of those games are awesome, underrated basketball games.
They kind of hit their stride with the Xbox releases, absolutely. The full court press is okay. Full court press is okay. Inside Drive 2000 has its moments, but certainly 2002 onwards, they really did have a quality alternative to Live and the burgeoning 2K as well. Game Face Incorporated says, Mattel Basketball is my first game. Kept my own NBA Universe playing this gem. Yeah, I'm that old. And that is one of those really old handheld games. So that definitely is a throwback to sort of your very first early primitive games. Haven't played that one, Derek, but as far as Mattel Basketball games, we have played NBA Basketball for Intellivision.
I got to say something about that Mattel. electronic basketball game. I just watched for the first time a 1978 ad for that game. It is incredibly cheesy. It's so corny. I recommend anybody to go on YouTube and just type in the search Mattel electronic basketball. And I think that's one of the first listings that shows up. And the game just looks so primitive. Surprisingly, it's a 2-player game, so it can be 1 or 2 players, but it's just dots on a screen, and they try to make it seem so exciting on that commercial, and it's really cringeworthy. But that's what they were working with back then, right? And I'm sure that a lot of people did get enjoyment out of that game. But yeah, Gameface Inc., he must be absolutely floored with what video games turned into, if that was his first game. And I think about that often because my first game was Double Dribble, and I'm floored at, what video games are today. So I'd be interested in his thoughts on that.
Absolutely. And you talk about using your imagination and how we had to do that with some of the games that we grew up with. Now that's imagination there.
Yeah. I mean, it's just dots on a very small screen.
Yeah. We talk about dots for eyes, and that's dots for players.
Yeah, at least my players had bodies, like human bodies on Double Dribble.
Paper Nut says Atari 101 was first for me. First hook was Double Dribble with Chicago Red. First love was Super Tecmo NBA Basketball because it's good.
Yeah, so Tecmo Super NBA Basketball for Super Nintendo. A lot of fond memories with that. The majority of the time I used the Pistons, and they had Woolridge that year, which added another dimension to, throwing it down, attacking the rim and everything. Just the stat tracking, the portraits, the atmosphere, the music that played while you played, the pace of it, which was much faster than games like Bulls versus Blazers, and NBA Showdown and everything. I still like Tecmo Super NBA Basketball. I think it's a strong game.
And speaking of NBA Live 2000, that was Alex's first game. Says we would turn fouls and out of bounds off and hand check each other. The dunk hang times were ridiculous. Soundtrack was great too. Favorite teams were the Timberwolves, Blazers, and 90s All-Stars. And favorite player was Sabonis. And plenty of nostalgia there. Obviously, Derek, Michael Jordan coming into the game for the first time. The Decade All-Stars, the All-Decade teams, 90s All-Stars. I love playing with them as well. Some very memorable dunk animations in NBA Live 2000. And funnily enough, when I interviewed Rod Redekop on the podcast years ago, he did say that even going back to Live 95, when they were testing the games, a lot of the developers would turn fouls off and out of bounds and just shove each other like that. So I think a lot of people did, in the early days of basketball games, as much as people were sim heads and did enjoy having that realistic experience, certainly people turned the fouls off and had some fun with that as well.
We used to do stuff like that to either kill time or just to kind of randomize our experience. There was a playoffs that my oldest brother and I played on. I want to say it was NBA Live 96. And what we did is we turned all the rules off and we were only allowed to shoot threes. And so we were just gunning from free. Every shot attempt had to be a 3-pointer. And we would just see who would win. And it was kind of a fun new experience and a kind of a new way to enjoy that game. And as far as NBA Live 2000 goes, to tell you how much I love that game, not only have I connected with the community many times on it, but I would say that my brother Nick and I co-op, we have a season, we probably put over 100 hours into that game last year. And that's a big deal, Andrew, because that game came out over 20 years ago. So if we're still putting that much time into the game, it's got to have something that's drawing us in, right? And I just think that it was such a landmark release for EA Sports and for the Live series. It's in contention for the greatest NBA Live of all time.
And Jay says, I remember playing Dr. J versus Bird, but actually owned probably Jordan versus Bird or Double Dribble, Lakers versus Celtics 2. And Dr. J versus Bird, that early EA game, before they were even EA Sports, and it's sort of funny to see how they got Larry Bird and Dr. J to stand together for a cover shot, kind of like the Converse commercials where they had a lot of players who had animosity with one another in the commercial together to shoot that. But Jordan versus Bird, we've played that. We both own that on PC, I believe. That was one of my great pickups on eBay a couple of years ago. And it's funny to look at the NES version, Derek, because that's I believe that was published by Milton Bradley, the board game company.
It was, and but don't shortchange Milton Bradley there.
Hmm.
That game has awesome gameplay. It's my favorite version of Jordan versus Bird. And, the Jordan versus Bird also taught me some language related to the NBA and Jordan's dunks specifically. I was unfamiliar with the kiss the rim before Jordan versus Bird. The toss slam, right? That was another go-to in that game when you were doing the dunk contest, and I can just see the screen in my head and all those dunks that you could choose from and whatnot, and you had to execute them at a specific spot on the floor. I thought that video game was very, very well executed, and I still think that it's still playable today.
Still a better dunk contest than a lot of 2K games. I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, less skating.
Yeah, better judging as well. Kid Cash says, I think Hoops for NES was my first game. Jammer was the character that I used the most because of his jumper. I messed with the soundtrack, and the Around the World mode still hasn't been duplicated. That's a game that we played. I collected that one as well. And my first impressions of that game were kind of, this is very primitive, obviously, and it's not. I didn't really vibe with it. But then kept playing it, Derek, when I was covering it for Way Back Wednesday, and really got into it, and I just love that aesthetic of it. It just reminds me of playing on a Saturday afternoon, both outside, playing basketball, or doing anything outside on a sunny Saturday afternoon, or indeed playing video games. I just love that aesthetic of a lot of those 80s video games, that colourful nature, and it reminds me a lot of also of California Games. I mentioned that in my retrospective as well, the PC version of California Games. So, yeah, I quite like Hoops now, actually.
It reminds me of kind of going to the park and playing 1-on-1 and 2-on-2 with random people. Right. Or, playing 1-on-1 with my brothers in our driveway and whatnot. Do you remember we tried to play co-op on Hoops for NES, and the computer made us look absolutely stupid and just kept blowing us out over and over and over again?
We should give it another shot,
We couldn't even pass the ball. We should, but we got to figure that out, because we couldn't even pass the ball to each other. The computer just kept stealing it, and everywhere we went, we were just losing the ball. So yeah, we should try to figure it out.
Actually has an ending, that game, with cutscenes. Now, where are they now? Cutscenes for all the characters in that game. And again, those characters are such stock characters of 80s kids films and kids games, but I love them so much. Nostalgic cheese in the best possible way.
Where are they? They're in their 40s or 50s right now. Those virtual characters, they might be hanging up their basketball shoes at this point.
That's right. Shad Beans also casts a vote for Hoops on Nintendo, posts the cover art for it. And jumping over to our Facebook page for a few more responses now, Alejandro says this one in reference to Double Dribble, the clip that you posted and I stole shamelessly and posted on our Facebook page as well to share the prompt there. On a 11-1 sports cartridge and NBA Tecmo for the NES. Then when I was 9, my dad bought a computer. He gave some money to buy the Encarta Encyclopedia, but I came back with NBA Live 98. Live 98, definitely more fun than Encarta, I will say. That being said, I also have some nostalgia for the Encarta Encyclopedia as well, Derek. We got that with our first Windows PC in 1994, the IBM compatible, as it was, from Osborne Computers at the time. Microsoft Dangerous Creatures, Microsoft Encarta, but yeah, Live 98 is a more fun game than an encyclopedia.
The only thing I will say is bravo, you made the right choice. NBA Live 98 PC got a ton of play in my house, and it was also the first basketball video game I ever modded.
And Mark says Double Dribble and Live 08, Chicago and the 76ers respectively.
Hey, Live 08 getting a shout here. I wonder which version. I wonder if he's talking about PS2 or the PS3 version. A lot of people would probably say that the PS2 version / PC version plays better.
We did our best with the PC version as well with mods, but not quite as good as 06 PC, to put it lightly.
Yeah, I far prefer Live 06 PC.
And now jumping over to the NLSC Discord, ZZB44 says, born in 96 here, so my first vague memory is playing NBA Showtime on the PS1. I mostly remember the colourful team logos really catching my very young eyes. First vivid memories of basketball gaming are with NBA Live 2002 on the original Xbox. Glenn Big Dog Robinson was my main guy because I always played as the Bucks. I know the crazy backboard recoil is annoying to some, but as a kid it was so cool to throw down a dunk with the cool sound effects and see it shake. And I was very much a snobby simhead about the rocking backboard in Live 2002, Derek, at first anyway, but I really did get into that game, and I really do appreciate its style and its aesthetic now. but I was kind of snobby about it at first. But I do like Live 2002. I have a lot of nostalgia for it. As I've said before, it was the game that came out as I was entering my final year of high school, so there's a lot of mixture of wistful memories around that time, and sort of that transitional period in life of adulthood is on the horizon and everything. Live 2002 was a nice distraction from school and other things that were going on at the time. But yeah, that's really cool. And I always forget that Glenn Robinson was on the Bucks as late as 2002. For some reason, Derek, I had a false memory for so long of him moving on around about 2000 or 2001. But no, it wasn't until the 2002 offseason that he moved on from the Bucks.
And he was damn good on that Bucks team. And the Bucks team in the early 2000s that had Sam Cassell, Ray Allen, and Glenn Robinson, what a trio there. So much talent at that point. But yeah, I also want to say, and Zhao Sming may agree with me because I've heard his thoughts on these types of things. Give me that swaying backboard. Give me that rocking backboard. I want to see that player almost tear down that hoop,
the rubber bouncing,
that jam. Yeah, I am all about it. I actually love that aspect of Live 2002. Call me crazy, but I'm a fan of it. He mentions NBA Showtime, and I think that that's a very underrated arcade hoops game, and I think it's one of the few games that really grabbed you first from a presentation element, that NBC intro, right? That the NBC music playing during the intro, it very much resembles the true to life broadcast. It's too bad, I don't want to say wasted, but it's too bad that that intro and that NBC presentation was put into an arcade game as opposed to us having that full NBC presentation for a 5-on-5 sim, because how big was NBA on NBC at that time, Andrew?
Oh, for sure. And it's coming back.
We would have died to have that. Yeah, well, I don't really care that much about it coming back for today, but it was a big deal back then.
Pep says my first basketball game was Taito Basketball for Pegasus, I should say. Apparently that was a Famiclone, a clone of the Nintendo Famicom, of course. Remembers not liking the game, and then a few days later when the market was in town, exchanging the cartridge for something else. I believe it was Tiny Toon Adventure. My first game on PC was NBA Live 98, which I played on my friend's computer and later on my own. We were playing with the Bulls for most of the time, with legendary roster player as the go-to guy. We liked it mostly because that's the only b-ball game we had, and gameplay was nice at the time. Live 98 PC, really do enjoy that game as well. And I think Pepper's told this story in the Discord that, or might have been in response to one of my articles, that had some problems loading that game, would often crash. So I think this is you, Pep. If it's not, I apologize. But would run out of the room, he and his friend, and hide behind the couch until they heard the music that let them know that it had loaded properly. And I used to have superstitions like that on my old PC when games wouldn't load properly, crossing the fingers, looking away until you heard the music or the sound effects that let you know that the game had loaded. So it's fun to hear that other people had those similar superstitions with video games.
Is it crazy that I still do it sometimes? No, but seriously, I used to do the covering my eyes thing and looking through my two fingers to see if I saw some color, like to see like if the loading screen came up.
The PS1 disc loading, that's the big one.
Yeah, I used to have some weird suspicions when it came to getting my NES cartridge to work, like a certain number of times you blow into it, or a certain number of times that you need to like clank it against the front of the opening before you like push it down in. Like, a lot of hardcore gamers, I'm sure have gone through it.
And of course, blowing on the cartridge is something that we don't recommend. You actually clean it with a cotton swab, cotton bud, or we can use alcohol if it's particularly dirty. But you know, Derek, did you know that you actually don't have to push down the cartridge in the NES? That's just an aesthetic choice.
First off, I'll do it again, Andrew. I will blow on the cartridge, and I will never stop doing that. But no, I mean, I thought you had to push down on the cartridge so it secured itself in the NES.
Yeah, no, as long as it's as long as it's there flush against the connectors in the back, pushing it down was simply, just to protect the cartridge, but it's actually not necessary for the game to run.
Unbelievable. I'll have to test that out.
And finally, Wizcard Rush says, my first basketball video game was Kobe Bryant in NBA Courtside for the Nintendo 64. For the time, the graphics looked good, controls felt intuitive enough despite the N64 controller, and there was a season mode I could play through with stat tracking. My go-to team was the Utah Jazz because I really liked their logo and jersey designs as a kid. also them being perennial contenders back then, helped. Yeah, I enjoyed courtside at the time when I got it. It came out very late in the PAL regions, actually. June. The NBA Finals were almost over when courtside hit the N64 here in PAL regions, which is kind of funny to think about. It has one of my favorite short stints captured in a video game. David Vaughn on the Bulls played all the 3 games for them around the time of the trade deadline, and that's when the game's rosters are accurate as of, so you get some weird stints being captured there. Herb Williams is actually on the 76ers after being traded there for Terry Cummings, and shortly after in real life he was released and returned to the Knicks, so some weird stints captured in that game. Yeah, the N64 controller, not the best for sim games back in the day, but no, I certainly relate to enjoying that game, and of course, Derek, hanging on the rim, which is something we didn't get back in games for a long time.
Yeah, I do want to point out that I have a connection with him on something. So he stated that he was using the Utah Jazz because of their logo, right? And maybe their jerseys and whatnot. And I'm definitely that way sometimes with a team. And I want to give an example. So I've been working on an 85, 86 roster for NBA 2K19. I put a lot of hours into it. And I oftentimes have to put teams on the floor to test. And man, Andrew, those orange Cavs jerseys in 85, 86, I absolutely love them. I love that color. I love how they stand out on the court. I love the way the players look in them, like World Be Free and Roy Hinson and Mel Turpin and Ben Paquette and guys on that team. Like, part of the draw of me continually putting that Cavs team on the floor and even thinking about using them in a season, maybe against the CPU or my brother, is just I love the team art.
Absolutely.
Right? I love the court and I love the logo and I love those orange jerseys and I love the way they look home and away. And it adds to my draw to that team. So yeah, I definitely connect with him on that.
Now, when all else fails, when you're looking for a team to play with, whether it's an exhibition game or a franchise mode, if you can't decide, go with the branding that you like.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing with that is you'll never get sick of looking at your highlights, right? You'll never get sick of putting that team on the floor because you'll always want to look at that art.
Oh, exactly right. And I think for many years, the 76ers, with Iverson, of course, were a great team for that.
Yeah, and I even love the 05, 06, the alternate blue jerseys that we're wearing. I think they were also wearing those in 04 or 05. I often use those when they're available in video games.
But thank you to everybody who responded to Derek's prompts. Nostalgia is very popular these days, Derek, and I'm all about it. I've been dipping into the past more often than playing the more recent games. And yeah, going back to these old favorites, some of the first games I ever played, and also discovering other games from around the same time that I overlooked, has just been such a joy in recent years. And we connect, obviously, to do that over Parsec, and that's a lot of fun, and it will continue to be fun in the future. But it's great to hear other people's memories about their first basketball games as well.
What's cool is a lot of the community is still playing some of these old games, right?
Absolutely.
Including us and, at B-Ball Video Games. And I've seen, people sharing videos with us on X, formerly known as Twitter, where they are playing some of these classics and whatnot. And they still love talking about them as well. So, yeah, sure. Nostalgia is a hell of a thing. And some say that nostalgia could cloud judgment. And maybe some people it does, but it also can be a beautiful thing, right? Because there's so many memories behind it. And you can keep building on those memories by continuing, working through your passion and getting new games and modding and starting seasons and having laughs or having good competition.
No doubt, and we'll always support that. Retro modding, retro gaming, we are big advocates for that, and never feel ashamed about going back to an old favorite. There are some people who will say, why are you still playing that? Because it's fun. Because those games had heart. They had soul. There's quality in those old releases. Not all of them hold up as well. Some of them were even pretty rough at the time, and we recognize that, and we will absolutely call that out, whether it's on the podcast or in my retrospectives or when we talk about them on social media or in the Discord or the forum, Derek. But yeah, there are some great games from yesteryear, and we absolutely encourage you to play them.
Yeah, and keep an eye on our gameplay videos on the NLSC YouTube because we're consistently uploading footage from great games of the past and some bad games. NBA Live 07 video went up at one point. So.
Every so often we revisit a rough one just to just to look at it and point out its faults and see what it's all about. Like you've said on the podcast before, Derek, it's interesting to get into the mindset, or try to get into the mindset of developers and figure out what they were thinking with certain design choices.
It's one of my favorite things to put on a game and look at the menu and look what they were trying to do from an animation perspective, looking at what they're doing with their menu screens, the stat screens, what they chose, even something like what they chose for a player portrait, et cetera. Like, I love looking at the design choices of all basketball video games.
Never gets old going back in time to look at these classics and to create new memories with them, as we've said so many times, and we will continue to do that and share those experiences with you on the podcast, in articles, and in our YouTube uploads, of course. Look out for that Let's Play of Hoops and all the way to the end. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, we thank you for tuning in and invite you to join us again next week and every week, either on the NLSC, nb-live.com, our YouTube channel, or your podcast app of choice. In the meantime, please connect with us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us and, of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So, Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yep, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on YouTube, D43, and on the NLSC, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X. The NLSC is on X and Facebook at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, nb-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone!